So let's get right to it with some questions that I've got. And of course, anytime that a five-star offensive tackle is committed, hey, that's huge news. I don't care what your name is. And Oklahoma, with all this talk about can they compete in the trenches in the SEC? Of course, this does not help them this fall or maybe even the fall of 2025, but long term, it's huge. And it's also a great story, Parker, coming over from Nigeria. Quite the journey for this young man, Michael Fasusi.
Yeah, absolutely. Really awesome kid. He's got an outstanding personality. He's about the right things. Obviously, that's what OU loved about him. That's what so many other schools across the country loved about him. In addition to the fact that he's a very chiseled 6'6", 290, looks exactly like you want the modern left tackle to look like. He's got elite footwork, has a background in soccer, so that's not something you have to hone with him. Real powerful punch, really the complete package. It's the reason he's the number 11 overall player in the country per our national rankings council at rivals.com and the number 2 offensive tackle in the entire 2025 cycle. OU had to play the long game here. They offered Fasusi all the way back in January of 2023, and he had every big offer you could dream of. Alabama, LSU, Michigan, obviously the two big in-state schools in Texas and Texas A&M, who were the two other finalists in his recruitment. But a seminal victory on the trail for Bill Bedenbaugh when all is said and done, because most regard, as they well should, most regard Bedenbaugh as an elite offensive line coach across the collegiate ranks. And his resume bears that out. You look at all of the outstanding linemen that he's put in the NFL. He's now got back-to-back first-round picks in Anton Harrison and Tyler Guyton at left tackle. But in his entire illustrious career at Oklahoma and previously at stops like West Virginia, Arizona, etc., Bedenbaugh had never landed a player as highly regarded as Fasusi. Fasusi is the highest ranked offensive lineman to commit to Oklahoma in the modern recruiting era. So I think what thrills Oklahoma fans, what excites them, is the possibility of what Bill Bedenbaugh might be able to do with a player that has Fasusi's elite tools, elite foundation, because they've seen Bedenbaugh take 3-star talent in years past and mold those guys into long-term NFL mainstays. How much more so can you do that with a guy that you don't really have to mold? He's already pretty tailor-made for the college game.
Parker is live Monday through Friday at noon to 3 Central Time, and you can also pick it up on the KREF Sports app. And concerning this Fasusi flip here, or not a flip, but it's just a commit, OU Insider is the place to be on Rivals for Parker's work, and I'm sure a lot of great information. Again, it's a pretty fascinating story and journey of someone who knew nothing about American football or anything just 5 years ago to rise to the top of the sport at the high school level is pretty fascinating. All right, Parker. Also, of course, a couple of weeks ago, the news came down about Jaden Gibson, of course, out for the season, a wide receiver who, in reviewing his numbers from last year, is pretty impressive what he put together down the stretch and scoring touchdowns against some pretty good competition, finishing with 5 touchdowns, 14 catches. We know that the wide receiver room is strong. Does it take any type of hit, and how does it get reshuffled because of Gibson's injury?
Yeah, well, you look at the stat line for Gibson last year, only 14 catches, right? But that alone really doesn't tell the story of the impact he had on this offense, because he was a big play machine. Anybody that watched Oklahoma consistently throughout the course of the 2023 season could see and feel that whenever Gibson made a play, it was a big one. It was an impactful one. It was a consequential one. Every single one of those 14 catches was a huge one for Oklahoma. He was making a tangible impact on the outcome of the game every single time he touched the football, and he was a guy that got looks in big moments. Now, as things stand right now, best case scenario for Gibson going into the 2024 season, he was no higher than 5th on the depth chart at wide receiver for Oklahoma, which is kind of crazy to think about. A guy that was so productive in such a limited capacity last year and has a 6'5" frame, electric speed, really everything you could ask for in one of those plus size modern wide receivers. A guy like that could be no higher than fifth on the pecking order at wide receiver, but that's reality. The Sooners bring in Purdue transfer Deion Burks. They bring back Nick Anderson, who was in most statistical categories their most productive receiver a year ago, had 10 touchdown catches. Andrell Anthony was the most productive receiver for this program over the first 6 games of last season before sustaining an injury against Texas. And then Jalil Farouk is a 2-year going on 3-year starter for this program at wide receiver. So they are not devoid of weapons by any means. And look, what happened to Gibson is unfortunate. Nobody wishes that upon him. But by the same token, you can acknowledge that and also acknowledge that Oklahoma would tangibly miss his presence much more if he played pretty much any other position but wide receiver, because they are just so deep at that position. They got rising sophomore Jaquez Petaway, who was a former top 100 overall recruit in the country, a couple of speed demons in Brennan Thompson and Zion Raggins. And Thompson made several big plays down the field last year, including a 60-plus yard touchdown catch. In that room with J.J. Hester, a Missouri transfer who's going into his 5th year of college football, as well as true freshman Ivan Carrion, a 6'6" native of West Texas. So there are plenty of pieces there at the wide receiver position. Obviously, you'd rather have Gibson than not have Gibson, but Oklahoma should be able to continue operating effectively and efficiently through the air in his absence. No question about that.
Parker Thune, OU Insider. It's also KREF Sports, Monday through Friday, noon to 3 Central Time. Any indications that things are being figured out along the offensive front, the main concern going into 24?
Yeah, and I think we discussed this the last time I jumped on with you, Mark. The question for Oklahoma really isn't about the individual talent level of all the various components on that offensive line, because you do have a bunch of guys that have played a lot of football, whether at Oklahoma or elsewhere. The Sooners brought in 5 transfers in the offseason, and so they have some very experienced, very talented football players on the offensive line. The question becomes, how do they gel? How do they cohere as a unit? Because if you have 5 individually strong offensive linemen, that's great. That doesn't mean you're going to have good offensive line play, because they have to learn to operate collectively as a unit. And that's been a difficult thing for Oklahoma to really establish throughout fall camp, because they've had guys banged up. Branson Hickman, the transfer center from SMU, has been banged up. Jake Taylor, whom I would project to be Oklahoma's starting right tackle, he's been banged up. Troy Everett, the Appalachian State transfer, who made several starts at guard last season for Oklahoma, he's still working back from an injury he suffered in the spring. Josh Bates, real exciting interior player that the Sooners are high on going into his redshirt freshman year. He's been banged up, among others. So there hasn't been a ton of continuity on that offensive line throughout fall camp. And so that has kind of contributed to the big question mark for Oklahoma. Of course, the offensive line remaining static, remaining constant through fall camp. I wouldn't say you have less questions about the offensive line than you did going into fall camp, which is obviously not best case scenario for Oklahoma. Bill Bedenbaugh is the type of guy that you trust to figure it out, but it would certainly seem as though for the first couple of games of the season, throughout non-conference play, the Sooners are going to have some things to figure out up front, just because they haven't really been able to establish any continuity in terms of the 5 guys that are playing alongside one another on the first team up front through fall camp.
College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, But you can't miss Steve's weekly Under the Radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.